Hello and welcome to a rather impromptu video about backgrounds because I had someone ask on Twitter about how I did the backgrounds in this animation, but I thought I may as well talk about some other backgrounds that I've done in other animations that have been like kind of interesting. So yeah, I just wanted to cover some fancy little tricks I've done with the backgrounds. Alright, so the first example I've got is a relatively normal background. Normal in that it's just like multiple background elements and we've just got some parallax, just kind of imitating a camera dollying, which if you didn't know is like moving the camera. But yeah, the way we achieve that in animation is just by drawing in my case, the sky, the buildings, and the trees on their own separate layers. As you can see, and just scrolling them along at different rates. Let's move on to something a little more funky though. I mentioned this in a different video, but in this shot, I tried to replicate a dolly zoom, which is an effect surprisingly achieved with cameras when you dolly and zoom at the same time. So what it actually does though, or at least how I've tried to replicate it with animations, if I pull back the curtains, look how weird this shot looks, is by basically shrinking the background faster than the foreground. In this case, the foreground is even growing. Now, if I wanted to be really correct about it, these background trees would have been even smaller. So this is what it would have looked like, I guess, if it was more correct. As you can see, the background shrinks a lot. And yeah, it really gives it just simulates a dolly zoom, which is what I was aiming for. Yeah, so I guess that's something I should have done, but you know, you animate and you learn. Yeah. Moving on to something relatively different though. This not only involved camera movement, but I guess changing the focus of the camera, or the quote-unquote focus of the quote-unquote camera. So here we've got a shot from the Minecraft animation I did, where you can see it's kind of imitating like rotating and, sorry, not rotating, panning and dollying the camera. Yeah, and you might have noticed that in the final animation there is blur applied, and I actually didn't do that in Toon Boom Harmony because at least the version I'm using, which is Essentials, the cheap one, I can't do any like blur effects that I know of. But the way I did it anyway is just by taking all the separate parts, if I can find these layers. Here we are. So what I did was I basically took every chunk of layers, every layer folder, and I rendered them separately. As you can see, here they are individually. But yeah, I rendered them separately, and then I chucked it into my editing program, which at the time was Film Express, and I blurred them there, and yeah, it came out with a result that I was really happy with. When it comes to the camera movement in this shot though, what I did was again, like the first example, they just slide across at different rates. But you can see the layer on the front is moving to the left, whereas the layer on the back is moving to the right. And yeah, that gives the effect of and that creates the effect of like panning and dollying around like a center point. So if you imagine real life, it's like you'd be like holding the camera and walking around, I don't know, somewhere around here probably. Now something that I kept note of while sliding around these background parts was, let's just say for example, if you look at this spot on the tree, this bit of the grass here, and that part of these background trees here, that part there. You can see when they slide across, it kind of always maintains like a straight line between them. And if that weren't the case, when that wasn't the case, it just looked really wacky and off. But yeah, so that was a really, really fun shot to animate. What's kind of interesting, I guess here's a piece of trivia for you. I had the idea for this shot and then I kind of built the entire animation around this. It was originally going to be a lot shorter because I just wanted it to kind of make this video as an experiment, but then I managed to kind of make a whole video around it, which is fun. Yeah. And finally onto this shot, which is from my most recent animation, where I did some, I guess, kind of stylized perspective, which was quite fun to do and took a lot of messing around with, as you can see when I pull back the curtains. Don't mind that, that's just me keeping note of the thickness of the brush I was using. So yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff going on here. Mainly, there's this background here. Yeah, buildings. And I drew them like this. I drew them on this weird curve. Yeah, and throughout this shot, they're rotating and shrinking, but also skewing. Skewing, by the way, is when you do this. Yeah, so if you just take note of how skewed the buildings are, you can see it's kind of slight, but it does get slightly more skewed. The reason that I did that, it might be because I drew the perspective like incorrectly and this was a very, I guess, cheap workaround, but hey, it's a workaround and it worked. So yeah, that's what I did there. But another element is the path, which was achieved with a mask. So what I did for the path was that I drew this, I guess just a big square of grey with the path lines on it, and that was masked onto this section of path. Yeah, and so that means that basically that almost pattern will like scroll along and it won't show up anywhere other than on the path where I want it. But yeah, so those two things combined means that you get this, you get the path scrolling like that, and you also get the buildings moving. Something that I took note of was trying to get the path, like where they intersect with the buildings, the path lines, where they intersect with the buildings. I wanted to keep it relatively consistent, so it didn't look like the path was sliding around at a different rate to the buildings, because that just would have really, it just would have looked quite strange. In fact, we could probably show that off. Let's see if I just do this. You can see like that, it just looks wrong, and the effect doesn't really work. So yeah, that's something to keep note of, I suppose. Oh, and when it comes to the sky, the clouds. I could have done this a similar way to the buildings, but to be honest, it's just the clouds. There's not a lot of movement going on, so I just made them just transform along like that, and it works fine. So yeah, that's how I did some funky background stuff in animations. Again, this video is kind of a bit improvised, so it might be a bit poo-poo, but either way, I hope it was helpful to someone, or maybe you just learned a random thing. I don't know. Yeah, thanks for watching.